Hey guys, today we're going to talk about forward facing sonar. We're kind of going to dive into how it works, the characteristics of it. I've got some examples of the beam, what shape it looks like, cardboard cutout. Everybody likes that. Help visualize certain things. Talk about just transducers, mounting options, settings of course, and then I'll have plenty of on-the-water examples identifying different species of fish. The goal of this video is to help you make the most of your time on the water and help you understand what you're seeing. That way you can just be as efficient as you can and catch a lot of fish. It doesn't really matter what brand you're using, if you're using Garmin, Humminbird, or Rance, but this video is going to be about Garmin or based off of Garmin for the most part because that's what I have on my boat. But having used them all, they're all pretty similar. So this video is not about which one's better, but more or less for you to understand what you're seeing and just do the best that you can with it. All right, so I'll start off by saying forward-facing sonar is different from your other images or your other technology that you have, whether it's down imaging, side imaging, 2D sonar, is that it's real time. So when you're looking at any of your other previous technology, you are getting, you know, a beam sent out or a ping sent out and it's coming back to the boat and then it's kind of painting your picture piece by piece as time goes on. So everything that you're seeing on that is, you know, behind you or it's the past. It is not necessarily the present, or you're seeing a very, very small picture of a present. But with LiveScope, you are seeing an entire picture that's unfolding in front of you in real time. And I'll kind of talk about how that works here in a minute when we get into the transducers and stuff. But the first thing I want to kind of talk about is just the beam itself and kind of help you understand what you're seeing and what kind of picture is being painted.
All right, before we go any further here, let's look at the screen itself and kind of help you understand what's going on. So this top section here, this is going to be your distance away from the boat. So we are set on 100 feet right now. So out here, this fish on the bottom is about 70 to 75 feet away. And if you look over here, this is 0, so you're actually looking back behind the boat about 10 feet as well. So you're actually getting a little bit behind your transducer rather than seeing strictly straight beneath it. So that is something that you can adjust, and we'll talk about that later. The left-hand side is your depth. So you can tell here we're in about 15 feet of water. So this is a relatively flat area that we're in, and this large green blob here, that is the bottom. It is taking up about a third of the screen, maybe a little bit more, and that is because of the depth range that you can select. So if you notice over here, I have it set to 25 feet and it is on fixed. I recommend turning the auto depth range off because it's going to constantly change this all the time and your picture is going to be moving when you don't want it to. And it's also better to have this set about 5 to 10 feet, ideally 10 feet deeper than what you're going to be fishing. That will allow you to see the bottom. You won't miss anything on the bottom. Like this is a fish here that's relatively close. If you have this, say, set at 15 feet, you're technically fishing a little bit shallower, you may miss this because it's going to cut this off the screen or you're not going to be able to see the entire fish. So you're better off having this be a little bit bigger. And it also keeps your screen from stretching everything so much and will actually make it a little bit more clear on independent objects. At the bottom of the screen here are your controls, basically quick controls. You can adjust your range, how far out you're looking. You can adjust your gain, also known as your sensitivity. We'll get into that later. And then you can adjust your depth range here. So here is a small school of baitfish, and here is a fish off the bottom. Looks like there may be another fish over here. And you can tell from this picture that this is a relatively hard bottom right here with the brighter return. Maybe gets a little bit softer out here. You can even tell there's some sort of object here on the bottom that has a small shadow behind it as well. So there's a lot of information to take in at one point in time, and you got to remember, unlike your other sonar, this is all happening in real time. You're seeing it all unfold in front of you. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the beam width and kind of help you figure out what the beam shape looks like and what you're seeing when you're looking at this screen.
We'll start with this. Your beam is going to be looking like this, some way, shape, or form. Pretend it's mounted here, your transducer, whether it's on your trolling motor, it's on a pole, whatever you do. Wherever you point this little section cone here is what's going to be displayed on the screen. Now, a lot of people are asking or have asked, you know, how much am I seeing? What am I seeing? What type of area is it? And it all comes down to this angle here. So your transducer is going to shoot out a cone, so like this, right? And that particular angle from your transducer on a Garmin is 20 degrees. It is 18 degrees for Lowrance. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head what it is on Humminbird, but it's in that same realm. So the further out you get, the further away from the boat you go, the wider this cone becomes. So with a 20-degree angle, it becomes a third of the distance. Your width is a third of the distance away from you. So at 100 feet, you're at around 33 feet wide. At 50 feet, you're going to be around like 18 feet or something, somewhere within that realm. And at like 10 feet, it's only going to be, 3 feet wide or so. So that can kind of help you understand how wide of an area you're seeing. But you're also seeing the entire water column. You're seeing everything that's encompassed within this, what would be a 3D shape. Now, I've got this squared off to where it's a perfect 20-degree angle here cone that keeps expanding, right? But the live scope beam, I know for sure, isn't necessarily this exact shape as it gets out to the end. Is a bit of a thing online about it, but they kind of have it tied down a little bit more on the engineering side of it. I think it's a little harder to obtain some of that information, but I believe it starts to get more of a almost like a rounded radius here on the outside edges instead of just imagine it being a total square box. But basically the easiest way to interpret it in your head is that this is the shape that it takes on, and it just continues down. That's just the sake that we're going to use for our examples here. So another question a lot of people ask is, where or how can I tell exactly where something is within this cone based on, the width? Because obviously as we get further out, say we're 30 feet away, something could be in this, but it could be off to the side or something. How do I know exactly where it's at? So let's just pretend that this is in 20 feet of water. So this entire thing, top to bottom, is 20 feet. And remember, it's 100 feet long, we're going to call it right now. And let's say we have a brush pile or a fish 10 feet down. Let's just call it some fish 10 feet down out here suspended, about 100 feet away from the boat. So if you pan directly at the fish and it's in the center of the beam, that's when you're going to get your strongest return. It's going to be the brightest that's going to be in that portion. As you pan, say, your trolling motor to the right a little bit and it gets closer to the edge, it's kind of going to dim it up a little bit. And the same thing as you go this way, it's also going to dim it up. So you can kind of focus in and then feather your trolling motor back and forth until you get to the strongest, return. And that's basically going to be around the center of your beam, and that's going to get you the closest to that fish or that object, whatever you're looking at in that instance. So on your screen, let's look like this since we're looking away from the boat. On your screen, if you cast your bait out here towards the end, you let it sink down, right, and you start reeling it in towards this fish. If you have it in the center of the beam and you cast right at where you think the center of your beam of your trolling motor is, that's going to get you the closest to the fish. If you're off a little bit, well, it's going to display on the screen that it's all together, but in reality, the fish could be here and you're casting, say, over here. So that's something that we'll get into a little bit more on some of the water examples to help you understand that. All right, so now we'll use the cardboard cutout here to kind of show you how live scope works. So this is your beam, the entire shape of it, right? 3D model. Now imagine if you have this transducer up here, so this is your source, and we start to draw some diagonal lines that come across. Then we break this up into like 6 sections of it, right? Well, each section of that we are going to now call a cone. And basically what you have is each one of these individual cones are scanning through a frequency. I don't know off the top of my head. I think they start around 500 kilohertz and it goes up to like 1,100 or so kilohertz. So basically starting at a frequency, scanning through it. And it's slicing this little cone here into a bunch of different little sections, and it's kind of giving it that real-time data, and it's doing it through all 6 cones or however many at a time. And then it's basically taking all that information and it's stitching it together. So there's a lot of processing going on, and basically that's why your live scope has this black box. That's why Lowrance had the box with the active target. I don't know if they still have that or not, but a lot of these companies, it was too much processing power to put into the units themselves to do it efficiently. But with all of this scanning and stuff and cycling going on kind of at the same time, the first versions were pretty prone to interference, having ghost trees and having blind spots and stuff. with all of it, and they're getting better over time, obviously, and there's continuous updates between all the manufacturers trying to dial everything in. But what you do end up with in the blind spot category is, say you have your 6 beams positioned, right? Well, they need to be basically perfectly laid next to each other in order to not miss any information. But if this beam, say, is cocked up a little bit and this one is down, or vice versa, well, now you have a space in here that's really not getting the information. It's not getting scanned properly, and you're going to end up with a dead zone. So say, you know, you're reeling your bait through or something, and you're watching your bait, and it gets to a certain point in your screen over time, and then it's just disappearing, but then it picks back up over here. Well, that's because it's usually going through some sort of blind spot or some sort of dead space from your transducer. And with Garmin, you can adjust something that's called your focus, which you can basically take the beams and you can shift them and kind of overlay the degrees and the stitching itself. Not 100% sure if you can do that on the Rants and Humminbird. I would imagine there's some sort of setting or something that you can adjust on that if you're having issues with that. But that's usually a culprit, and it was for a long time with Garmin, especially with the earlier transducer, the LVS 32. And since they've come out with 34, that has been resolved a lot. But there have been some updates where they've had issues with that reappearing and just having to make adjustments to it. That's basically what had happened with the updated transducers for Garmin when they had the LVS 32 and they swapped to the LVS 34. It just changed the layout of the transducer, basically of where each little cone or beam, you know, started from and how they were arranged on the transducer head to just give it better target separation, better clarity, and to decrease your blind spots, essentially. The last thing we'll use the cardboard cutout for is your angles, your mounting options, basically, for your transducer. So on Garmin specifically, you have the ability to mount it to your trolling motor shaft. You have the ability to mount it to the trolling motor head itself. They have the perspective mount. All of these options come with some sort of degree built into the mount. You're going to hear it called an offset. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about having a 0-degree offset. That has become very popular. That is designed to go on a pole, something that has nothing that can get in the way of your beam itself. Imagine this is your beam mounted on your trolling motor or pole, whatever you have it on, and it is perfectly perpendicular, right? It's 90 degrees upright. There's no cant to it, nothing. Well, in order for these mounts and things to be put on trolling motors and not block part of the beam here, because remember, they are designing all this to work with every angle, basically every mode, whether it's forward mode or down mode, and then if you have a perspective mount to be able to work with that as well. It's going to take your beam, and instead of being at an upright 90 degrees, it's actually going to kind of kick it like this a little bit in order to get around, say, the trolling motor head that's down in this area in front of the beam itself. The reason that this comes into play, or that I bring this up, is since the bottom is now kicked out more than the top, it's going to kind of mess up your tracking. So imagine if we are shining over here at this light switch, that's our bait. Well, at this point, the top of our transducer, or the top of our beam, is pointed right at the light switch, but the bottom of our beam is now kicked off to the side. So if that was our bait and it's going to fall down in the water column, as it falls, we actually have to pan our transducer over to the right a little bit to keep that back in the beam, because it's naturally kicked off to the left. So that is something that a lot of people have started to transition to, that are really, really serious about LiveScope, is that 0-degree mount. It'll allow you to track your baits a whole lot easier, but it's not a total necessity. You just have to understand that, you know, whatever side your transducer is mounted on, that's going to be kicked out a little bit on the bottom of the beam there, and you just have to learn to account for that. All right, now let's go look at some stuff on the water and show you some real examples. All right, so we're underneath the bridge here. Might be a little hard to hear with some of the traffic, but if you have something like this on your lake, or something that's structured, you know, very fixated, I would recommend going and take a look at it, and you can help kind of hone in your skills a little bit about what you're seeing on LiveScope, even side imaging, any of that type of technology. Something like this is great to idle around and kind of just take a peek at it. So if we look on the screen here, this is your pylon. So this is where our trolling motor head is pointing, and you can see this is the first concrete structure here. And you can see, if I pan a little bit to the left, There's actually an older cross member, or I don't know if it's part of it, I don't know the bridge construction, but another piece that comes across in between these two pillars right here. So you can see like there's a fish right on top, that's a fish over there. Let's see if we kind of pan over here. Now we're going to be looking at this pillar, and that's what it looks like on live scope. So all these dots right here are fish. Some of these are probably spotted bass. You might have some small largemouth in there too, and then some of them are definitely going to be crappie that are mixed in. But you really pretty much get every type of species that like to live around these bridge pillars. So you can see them moving in and out, and kind of use this as an example too. So I got my depth right now set at 40 feet. So if I lower this, say I'm only looking at 20 feet now, see how it expanded this fish? It's much larger now, and I'm looking out 75 feet. So let's say I bring it in even more. I know I'm got to get a little closer, but if I get a little closer here, now you can see, look how big these fish look, and it's the exact same fish. It just blows everything up. So this is a great example of adjusting your settings for the condition of what you're doing. If you're bass fishing, you know, normally they're going to be further out, but if you're crappie fishing and you're kind of sitting still under an area like this, this is golden. You can really see your jig if you toss that down there. It just makes everything a lot easier to see. So I'm going to go ahead and toss my jig, actually, a little crappie jig just over here, just so we can see it and kind of show you what it looks like going down on the screen here. All right, now here's what I'm throwing, just a little 16th ounce head with a little boot tail on there. So you'll see my jig fall down here, and it's going to look maybe a little bigger compared to some of this, or it's going to look, you know, like the same size as a fish, and that's because the density of it. So I'll cast out there right next to this pillar. You can see it falling down right there. The fish are getting on it, but I'll see if I can kind of jig it through. You can see the fish kind of reacting to it. I'll just move it around more than I maybe normally would. You can see it coming on this side of the screen, falling down. You got a fish following it. Just following it up, hand in hand. So that's what they look like. That's what your jig's going to look like, you know, when you're in the smaller settings here. You're real close.
All right, here is a brush pile that is positioned on the end of a point, basically dropping off into deep water in the main lake. Now, in the red circle here is going to be my little swim bait falling down. You're going to see it come across. It's going to come in and out of the shot a little bit just because the wind fighting the boat, moving the trolling motor back and forth, getting everything back in view here. But you're going to see multiple fish kind of come up at it and basically shy away from it. Some are going to end up kind of hitting it, but didn't have the right color, the right presentation, something they didn't like about it. So that lets you know you need to change something whenever you're getting fish that they're acting like that aren't fully committing to it. So you can see it just kind of slowly coming across the screen here. There goes another fish coming up. It's right on it, tailing it, decides doesn't like it. And then I'll have to pull it away from them eventually and make another cast at them and come back down on the same pile. But you can see a good return there on the pile. You can kind of see the density of it. That's a good thing with your color limit. You can increase it and kind of make the harder return pop. So you can see the bait coming down again. I cast it just a little bit beyond it and I start bringing it across and see what these fish, if they're interested or if they are not going to take the bait this time again. So you can see them quickly reacting to it. Multiple fish coming out, a couple fish hitting it. Got a whole school of them following it. I think some of those fish could have been crappie that were sitting down there on it, but I think the most of those were spotted bass. A lot of times I catch a lot of spotted bass in and around this particular pile here, being off the main lake like that. So one more cast, we're coming down. You can see my bait falling on the right side of the screen, basically gets down to the bottom. And this is going to pull a lot of fish out of the pile. And then you're going to have fish that are going to be coming off of the bottom at the lower side of the ledge here, a little bit closer to the boat. So you can see we have fish just going crazy. You're going to have a lot of fish coming up real fast here. I'm going to be pulling about a dozen of them. But I had no takers. Just had a lot of activity spread out all in the same pile there. Alright, I want to show you guys kind of what I'm talking about with the shad. So these little clouds here are the shad. And if we pan over, there's a bunch of fish. Some of those are bass. But they've been kind of roaming underneath the shad. Like here comes some right here. So they're moving. They're kind of probably going to position underneath here, and they might even come up and start feeding on them. But you can see them, some of them coming off here, and some of those might be crappie too mixed in. But I would say that like these over here are probably bass. Some of them are spots, some are largemouth. But that's kind of what you're looking for. And like I said, I'm fan casting around this jerk bait in this area. You can throw spinner baits. You can throw your plastic rigs. Like here's some fish feeding on them right there. These fish are going to come diving through these schools of shad, and it's going to kind of probably start moving around a little bit. All right, so far the on the water examples have been bass for the most part, and seen some shad, but I want to show you some crappie now. So these particular fish here I'll play are going to be really close to the bank. This was mid to late winter, I would say. Fish were kind of starting to stage up just a little bit. Water is still very cold, but they're pulling up on these steeper banks. But you'll notice compared to your bass and stuff, you have much more of a tight-knit ball of fish. They really stack on top of each other, but you can still distinguish the individual fish kind of out of there. Now notice this is the GLS 10. So this was when I had the LBS 32 compared to the newer 34. If you look at the same picture here with the 34, with these fish that are all stacked together, that's when you can really kind of start to notice the better separation, the better clarity, where you'll be able to kind of individualize those fish and pick them out more than you will see just kind of blob here. So you'll see as I hit play and this pans on how large this school of crappie really is. Further out this way, they become a little bit more elongated, a little bit less of a hard return. And I think part of that is some of these fish in the front get so thick that it almost blocks the return on the back end of it, or they could be positioned off a little bit to the side. But for the most part, they're going to be pretty tight knit. One other thing to note is these fish are set up on the bottom here, as you can see, and it's relatively shallow. This next piece that we're going to look at is going to be looking kind of like this. This is on down imaging. You're going to have a school of crappie that are suspended out in the open, and I'll show you what they look like. So this is a smaller school, probably only 30 or so fish in there, but these are just completely open water fish. As you can also tell, this is a good point. This was taken when I had a 93 SV, so a 9-inch unit. The last screen that I just showed you was on a 12-inch graph. And the distances were pretty comparable, but you can tell that these look a little bit smaller, and that is just based on the screen size. So with anything forward-facing, screen size really does matter. The bigger, the better. Some people are running 16-inch units compared to your 12s, and that even makes a big difference. Some people are running these massive 18 or even 22-inch units that are networked off of your main graph. That's starting to get a little obnoxious on the size there, but it definitely does help having the screen be as large as possible, because it does just stretch everything out and make it easier to follow. And then here is another small school. As you can tell, again, not a huge school, but they are just suspended over the open water. A little bit closer to the bottom this time. The last fish were out over 30, 40 feet of water. These particular fish are only over about 20 feet. This is the same school. This is going to be me casting though. You can kind of see my jig fall down, but it kind of comes out of the shot a little. But my jig is going to be right around this vicinity by my cursor. You're going to see it actually kind of come across slowly, and you're going to have a fish that's going to pull out of this section of the school, come up, eat it, and you'll actually be able to kind of watch me pull the fish out of the school after it's hooked up. So here it comes. There I am hooking up with it, and I'm starting to pull it out of the school. So this is the fish right here that's currently hooked. These are some other ones that are following. So you'll notice when you do crappie fish and stuff, you always want to, go above the school, because they like to feed up. And what happens is you're usually going to get 1 or 2, sometimes 3 fish that are going to pull off of the big bunch like this and kind of go investigate. And at that point, one of those fish is usually going to commit to it. And it seems like if there's more than one fish, it becomes competition, and that really entices them to bite. If you're a big crappie fisherman, you've never used it before, you'll definitely learn a lot of things just about fish behavior and kind of how you can present your baits to them to get more fish to bite. All right, we're on the water. Let's go over some settings and kind of how I like to have things set up. Now, I just installed the LVS 34. You can see here I had the 32 previously, and I did a new update, so I believe everything here is on the factory default, which is pretty good. If you notice in the middle of the screen here, you'll see this very distinct sharp line, very straight edge, not natural, and that is actually part of the focus. So when I was talking about the beams, how you can overlay them and kind of adjust them, that's partially what this is. In the latest update that I had gotten at the time, introduced that. A lot of people were saying that had not had that issue before with the LVS 34, so that is something that needed to be corrected or still needs to be adjusted on my end, but is a good representation of that nonetheless. Just a refresher of what we're looking at here on the screen. This is your beginning point, so this is your lateral distance away from you. So you can see up here, 50, 55, 60, whatever, so on and so forth. So on the Echo Map units, plus or minus, you can run this in, run it out. If I'm bass fishing, I'm normally running it right around 100 feet or so. I'm looking out. And then as far as your depth, which is this side here, so how far down you are, I'm normally running that about 10 feet or so past the depth that I'm fishing. So let's just paint over here real quick. Let's say we're fishing about 18 feet of water or so. I'm gonna have this around 25 or 30 feet. And you just plus or minus like this. So if you plus, it's gonna get deeper. You can see it's 35 feet there. So everything is going to shrink, kind of get compressed. If you decrease this, it's going to stretch everything out. If you go too close to like the depth that you're fishing, like this is at 20 feet, you kind of lose the bottom and you're gonna miss actually a lot of bass if you do that. So having a little bit deeper, you're going to be able to see better, and it's actually going to keep your screen a little bit more clear, because as you do stretch things out, it gets a little bit more pixelated. Unless you go to the higher series units, that helps with that a little bit, because they do have a better pixel density than the Echo Maps and stuff. And then my gain, which is just your sensitivity, I normally run that in like the 60s up to maybe 70. Sorry, I hit the menu bar here. But if we turn this way up, the screen gets blown out, right? You get a lot of interference. You see a lot of clutter, things that you don't necessarily want to see. And if you turn it too low, well, then you're gonna miss things. So I normally run that around, like I said, 70% or so. Depends kind of on your water clarity. If you have a lot of what I would call junk in the water, things floating through, you're gonna want that a little bit lower, and that's gonna help kind of filter some of that out. But there's also settings we'll get to here. So here is a little school of shad. Here's a couple individual fish, probably bass, just kind of suspended around them. I'll show you some brush piles and stuff too. And then as we pan over, we are looking up the bank here. So that's why it's going up the hill like that. And then if we pan to the left, we're looking out in open water, and it's gonna go down, which matches our contours here. Looking out that way, down that way, obviously up the bank. So looking at our actual settings here, like I said, everything that I just adjusted, you can adjust from this menu here, but then you can also go to your sonar setup, and this is where you kind of get into a lot of different things that you can adjust to your personal preference. But like I said, for the most part, a lot of this don't really have to mess with too much. So we'll start with appearance here. This is probably the most personal thing. Your eyes are gonna like whatever. So this is like a red. I normally end up running you can run blue. This is really bright. You can see, okay, it's a super sunny day, it's coming down, you can just see everything really well with blue. Same thing with the black emerald that I was running, everything pops really well. If you run the original color that it comes with, is going to be this amber. It kind of just whatever you want your eyes to see. Some people's eyes are going to pop better with a different color, maybe blue versus a green or an emerald or whatever. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this back on green for now. All right, so then you have color gain. That is basically going to increase the intensity of an object without increasing just the overall gain of blowing things out. So look at this little school of shad here. If we turn this way up, see how intense, how bright that gets? And if we turn that down, it kind of dulls it up. So if you want your bait to pop more, you want fish to pop more, you can turn this up. You can also leave it at default, but if you want a little bit hotter return without having the overall screen blown up, you can turn that up just a little bit. Then we have color limit, which is actually kind of like a filter. So if we turn this up, see how it erased all of your clutter, all of your kind of interference that you have. So if you want to have like a totally perfect clear black screen, you don't want to see any of this little fuzzy stuff kind of going on, you can turn this up a little bit. But be aware that if you turn this up too high, you are going to start to erase things in the screen. Basically, it's going to kind of filter it out as noise. So I normally just leave that off or as default, because this stuff here doesn't bother me. I want to see you know, everything that I can see without it being blown out too much. All right, and then we have trails. I do not like this at all, but I'll show you what it looks like. You basically, it's going to put in an item, or like if something's moving, it's going to show it going down. So this fish right here, as it's moving, it's kind of showing in the direction that it's moving. Like I said, I don't like it. It clutters up the screen. It kind of seems like it slows down the unit a little bit. And then you have bottom fill. So okay, you're looking at the bottom, but you're also seeing returns at the bottom. So if we turn this on, it turns this brown. Now if you see, say there's a fish on the bottom here and it's moving, it's going to show up here. It's basically a way to help isolate something that's on the bottom that's moving, or a return that's in the water, separate it from the bottom. That's the best way to describe it. I also leave that off all the time. If you have a fish that's moving on the bottom, you're going to see the little blob kind of going across. So I feel like it's just kind of unnecessary. Then we have the layout here. If you want a grid, you can turn that on, help you kind of see where something's at exactly. I also leave that off. Scroll history, not a good idea. It takes up too much of your screen, but it shows you what you've seen. On-screen control, if you want to have it, like those little quick overlays that I did, that's what that does. And then reverse range here, you can actually adjust how far back you want this to go. So if you only want to see basically from straight down to all the way in front of you, you can reduce this to 0 or even negative, and it'll show you only from that point out. I like to have just a little bit back because it gives you a little bit better space. If you are dropping straight down on something, you can see that area a little bit better. Then you have compress range. It basically keeps the beginning of the screen from compressing everything together. I also leave that off as well. All right, then we have noise reject here. So we can turn this on low, or let's just turn it all the way off. You can see we get beams. We have all sorts of interference here. You can put it on low, medium, or high. High is going to clear up the most. I usually run it on medium, but sometimes I do put it on high, and it seems to work okay with the 34 here. Then time variable gain here. So what this is essentially takes the top portion of your water column and kind of is going to filter that out, and it's going to give you more power in deeper water. So if you're fishing deep water, you want this TVG on, because it's going to basically give your sonar more power here in the water column to help see your bait, help see fish, whatever. But I normally run that either on low or off. And then we have ghost reject. So used to have a lot of issues, LiveScope did, with what they called a ghost tree, which would be like an object that would come down. Basically the beams would kind of form an object. So you can turn this off. It doesn't really change much. I never really had issues with it. Some people have had a lot of issues with it, but I just leave it on auto. If you're having, you know, a ghost tree issue still, you might want to turn that up to high, or I would recommend looking at your installation for possible interference, and then check your transducer as well. Make sure you don't have anything on there that's causing some sort of issue, like a defect or a rock chip or anything like that. Can sometimes cause the beams to do weird things, and then you're fighting a ghost image on your screen that's there all the time. Then we've got our overlay data. I like to have my depth and the voltage and the water temperature. You can have the time of day on here as well if you want to see that, just so you know what's going on, but I have that on my other unit, so
no need for that for me. And then our installation, this is kind of the final tab here. So you have the depth of your transducer, and then you have your stabilization, which you want that on. That keeps everything from basically kind of rocking. You have your calibrate your compass. I don't like doing this because it then puts a symbol on the top corner of the screen that drives me nuts. But I believe they say if you do calibrate it, it can actually help your unit a little bit. And it's also very important if you're running all Garmin to calibrate that, as dropping waypoints will then be accurate. But I only have one Garmin up front. Everything else is Lowrance, so I don't worry about that. But if you click on that, it'll give you the instructions to calibrate it. Orientation, this is basically if you want it to be in down mode, forward mode, or perspective mode. If you leave it in auto, it will automatically recognize that. Will tell you though that sometimes I take my transducer and I click it back one notch, especially with the 32 I did. So I would leave that in whatever mode I wanted it to be in, such as forward. That way it's not trying to get confused. And then your focus, this is basically your beam. So you kind of have different layers of beams like I had talked about. And this is making them overlap, kind of meet at the right spot, so you don't have a dead space in your screen. If you are having like an area in your screen where you're reeling in a bait or you're looking at a brush pile or something and it's not showing up, you know, it's like you're missing it for a minute and then it comes back in the screen, you're going to want to adjust your focus here and get your beams figured out. And if all else fails and you're messing with everything and you feel like you screwed something up and you can't get it back right, just restore sonar defaults here and start messing with everything again. You can't mess things up. If you do, this is just your go-to button and it'll get everything right again, and you start from square one. All right, so that's a little 101 on how LiveScope works, kind of diving into the settings and just help you get familiar with it. So I will say with LiveScope or forward-facing sonar in general, it's one of the easier things to learn to help interpret versus, say, side imaging or something. It becomes a little bit more intuitive, I think, just being able to pan around and see things on real time. Now, I didn't talk too much about the down mode or perspective mode. I may talk about perspective mode in a different video because it's kind of its own thing. The down mode, you pretty much just take your beam here. Instead of looking at this light switch looking forward, you just turn it beneath your boat like this. So it's just same shape, but it's looking down. It's not really that useful. I think forward mode gets it done because you can still kind of see behind your boat and underneath you. So I encourage you to go out, use your technology, and become familiar with it. And when I talk about side imaging and stuff, I usually tell people, lock your rods in the boat. Don't use them. Just go around and idle and look at stuff. And I would say for the first maybe half hour, go look at some hard objects. Go try and find some bridges or some things that you know are there, maybe areas you know that have brush. But then I would encourage you to get your rods out and start fishing just with one or two baits and kind of familiarize yourself with tracking your baits, figuring out what they look like, and then you can kind of piece together species of fish and get used to what you're seeing. And I think it all just helps it kind of come together. So hopefully it will help you shorten your learning curve on it and just help you get the most out of your settings, the most out of your units. I know this is based mostly on Garmin because that's what I run, but I can't stress enough on using the other brands that they're all very similar. You're just going to have a little bit different settings you're going to have to mess with. And at the time of me making this video, Humminbird has also come out with now Mega Live 2. But the downside to that is they're forcing everybody to buy the newer units. So that's kind of been a bit of a discussion in the fishing community. So I think a lot of people are going to be transitioning to just Garmin or to the Lowrance if they haven't already. So all in all, whether you've had forward-facing sonar for a while or you're brand new to it, think about getting it, this will help you dive into it a little bit. And I definitely think it will at least help you learn a lot about fish behavior. I know I have learned a ton since I've been using it. Things of what you thought fish were doing or how they acted, where they were staged up, whatever. Looking at your baits, I think we've learned a lot about just fish in general, that what we have thought over the years was not always necessarily true, and it just opens your eyes to a whole other world. So I encourage you to get it if you haven't, or go out with somebody that maybe has it on their boat and help open your eyes to what you see. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next video.